Hello, my name is Stephen Higgins. I'm the Managing Director for the Institute for Human Ecology, which is the co-sponsor for this event. And just a little bit about the Institute. The mission of the Institute is to promote human flourishing. And one thing, of course, that's vital for human flourishing is the stability of the nation so that people can be healthy, happy, and have free lives. 9/11 threatened all of these. So many of the foundations that we often take for granted were shattered by the terrorist attacks on 9/11. On 9/11, I was working in the United States Senate, in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was the chief counsel for the Terrorism and Technology Subcommittee. So I experienced a lot of what happened firsthand. I remember the coverage of the events, watching the planes crash into the towers, into the Pentagon in Pennsylvania. And I even remember the day before 9/11, I was with my senator, and we were actually, the two of us were having lunch with the Attorney General over in the Department of Justice, talking about just general Senate and Department of Justice business. It was a normal day, and then less than 24 hours, everything changed. I just want to tell you a little bit about Nicholas Dumovich, who's going to be our moderator tonight. He was a CIA officer from 1990 until 2016 when he came to the Catholic University of America, and he's the founding director of the Intelligence Studies program. He served as an analyst, speechwriter, and editor of the President's Daily Brief and a manager of analysts and a CIA historian. He also taught at the Coast Guard Academy and at American University, and he's a deacon of the Orthodox Catholic Church. So I'll turn it over to Nicholas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. Welcome, everyone. It's gratifying to see so many people coming out for the 9/11 event and not the accounting event. As Stephen said, I'm the director of our intelligence program here at Catholic University, and I'm very grateful to the Institute for Human Ecology for co-sponsoring this event. Any university worthy of the name searches for truth and goodwill. And in our intelligence program, we look at intelligence with eyes open as a function of government, as a tool of statecraft, and as a feature of the international scene. Our emphasis is naturally on American intelligence, and this inevitably brings up questions about intelligence activities and are they being conducted in accordance with our American values. The university's Institute for Human Ecology, through its generous support, has helped us address these issues by co-sponsoring 3 events. This is the third. We started last year in the fall with a panel discussion with General Michael Hayden on ethics and intelligence, sort of a general discussion. And then in the spring, we focused on the ethics of technical collection of intelligence. And this is our third event, and we are pleased to welcome Michael Morell, the former deputy director and acting director of the Central Intelligence Agency, to help us remember that awful day 17 years ago, this day, on a Tuesday, and the aftermath, including what came to be called the Global War on Terror, which is the focus of his memoir. Michael Morell is originally from Ohio, started at CIA 10 years before me in 1980 as an analyst on Asian affairs. By profession, he's an economist. And he rose to be director for all analysis at CIA. He was a briefer of the President's Daily Brief, which means he presented the daily intelligence report and assessment to the President of the United States. He held important jobs working with foreign allies. He was the executive director, that's the agency's number 3 position, under Director Michael Hayden, and then became the number 2, the deputy director, for 3 CIA directors. From 2011 to 2013, there were extended periods when you were the acting director of CIA, totaling 7 months, and I put on my CIA historian hat and ran the numbers, and that's the longest period anyone has served as acting director. So after 33 years of CIA service, he retired in 2013. He's been a frequent commentator on intelligence matters in the media. He hosts a podcast on CBS News called Intelligence Matters, which all my students would be very profitable for you to tune into that. And he published his memoir, The Great War of Our Time, the CIA's Fight Against Terrorists from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. and I recommend it as an essential resource for understanding the present era. Let us give a warm welcome to Michael Morell. So the topic is not exactly a cheery one, 9/11. We lost nearly 3,000 Americans on that day, probably the most traumatic day in recent American history. We watched those video images from that day, but still, that day is kind of fading in our memory. We're almost a generation removed from that day. Today's college students were small children, 2, 3, 4 years old. Before we start, I have to say, as a former intelligence officer speaking to another one, that we have a lifelong obligation to protect secrets. So I hope our audience understands that there may be questions Mr. Morell can't get into fully. Our mutual goal is getting through the evening without being indicted. I'd like to begin our conversation by asking Mr. Morell about the time before 9/11. Before 9/11, what did we know about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden?
So we actually, so first of all, it's great to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. Of all of the things that I do in my post-retirement life, spending time on college campuses is by far the most rewarding to me, the most intellectually stimulating, the most intellectually challenging. And to be able to, in some small way, help shape the worldviews of the next generation and people who are going to be making decisions for our country for a long time to come has real meaning to me. So it's great to be here. And let me say one thing about being acting director, tell you one story, maybe to get a little levity into the evening before we get back to the really serious stuff. When I was acting director the second time, so between David Petraeus and John Brennan, my wife and I went out for dinner in Arlington, Virginia. And we were in our armored SUV with our security detail, and we pull into this parking lot, and there's a guy standing against the wall of the restaurant, and he is looking at us, trying to figure out, who is this? Is this Michelle Obama? Is this John Kerry? Who is this? And he's on my wife's side of the car. So as she gets out of the car, he says to her, "Is that somebody important?" And without missing a beat, my wife said, "No, he's just acting important." It's a true story. You know, I will tell you that no institution in government, I don't believe any institution in the world was more focused on Al-Qaeda and bin Laden prior to 9/11 than the Central Intelligence Agency. We were the ones to identify him and his organization and its objectives and its goals and some understanding of its membership and its financing. We did a very good job of what I call strategic warning. Mm-hmm. A strategic warning being this group wants to attack America and American interests, and it wants to do so to drive the United States out of the Middle East so that the governments that we support there will fall, and those governments can be replaced with extremist governments that pursue Sharia law. Mm-hmm. We understood that better than anybody. And even strategic warning about wanting to attack us here in the homeland. So it wasn't just attacking us overseas. We had the East Africa embassy bombings in 1998. We had the bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen in 1999. So not just attack us overseas, but actually bring the fight here. Right? We provided strategic warning. In the late spring through the early summer of 2001, we were receiving quite a bit of intelligence that suggested that there was a significant attack coming. We shared all of that with the president. Not only significant, but multiple simultaneous attacks that would be catastrophic. Those were the words actually in the intelligence. We could not figure out time, place, or method.
Right.
So we didn't get the tactical warning, right? Didn't get tactical warning at all. But the strategic warning was there. That flow of intelligence dried up at the end of the summer. I will tell you that President Bush was extraordinarily focused on that intelligence stream from late April to early summer. Very, very focused on it. Agency was working extraordinarily hard to try to identify what the plot was. We didn't figure that out. Turns out that this intelligence that we were getting during that time period was coming from bin Laden going from training camp to training camp in Afghanistan, doing what leaders do, right, which is talking to their troops. And he would say to them something important is going to happen, something significant is going to happen, there's going to be a great thing that's going to happen. And so people read into what he was saying, and that was leaking out, and that's what we were getting. But we did not penetrate the inner circle of bin Laden to figure out what this plot was. We didn't, the intelligence community, and the FBI didn't penetrate the actual operatives who were here. So we both failed at that tactical warning and that tactical operational piece. So that's what happened beforehand.
And just moving to anticipating the reaction afterwards, CIA was on the receiving end of a lot of criticism, being asleep at the wheel, asleep at the switch, because of the tactical piece that we didn't get. I'm going to guess you don't think that's very fair.
So no, so look, I think, right, our fundamental job, right, CIA has three fundamental jobs. Right? One is to find out what our adversaries are doing, what their plans, intentions, and their capabilities are, what they're planning to do to us, to damage us, and get that information and tell our policymakers. That's the collection side of the business. Find out what your enemies are doing, that they're trying to keep secret from you, and get it. The second thing we do is take all of that information, right, and all of the information that's available to the entire U.S. government, including open source information, and put it all together and tell the president what it is we see. Mm-hmm. It's the second thing. That's what I grew up doing. That's what Nick grew up doing, what we call all-source analysis. And then the third thing we do is something called covert action, which we can come back to, and I'm sure we will come back to. Right? But look, the truth of the matter is that prior to 9/11, we collected enough intelligence, so the stealing of enough information to understand the danger and threat that this group posed to us. So that's the strategic warning piece, right? But we didn't penetrate the organization to the point of understanding what this particular plot was. And I'll tell you, after 9/11, over and over and over again, we collected the intelligence to identify plots and threats that were actually in train, and we stopped them. So I think it's a legitimate point to say CIA failed in its tactical mission prior to 9/11 to learn what that plot was and to tell policymakers so that they could do something to prevent it. And I think it's fair. What I think was not fair was this: you were asleep at the switch. Right? Because the truth of the matter is nobody was paying more attention than CIA, and very close second, the FBI.
And you were, in this period, the assistant to Director George Tenet, and then you became the PDB briefer, the President's Daily briefer from CIA to President George W. Bush. So you were in a position to see everything of the message that CIA was presenting to the White House.
By the way, the guy that gave me that job, briefing President Bush, is here. Thanks, Winston. My wife thanks you too.
Well, you could talk about what it's like to be a PDB briefer for the president. I'm sure that there are normal days, and then the most abnormal day of all was 9/11 itself. And if you could walk us through that, what was it like? What did you see?
So I think the best way to describe it is to say, and it's seared in my memory as if it was yesterday. I could walk you through every detail of that day, from waking up at 3:30 in the morning and getting my materials from the communicators who were traveling with the president.
You were with him in Florida.
So I was with him in Florida. So I got up at 3:30 in the morning in the hotel, and I went to the president's communicators, the people who, get sent from the White House Situation Room, all of the classified material for the president, get my material. So I remember from that very moment right to the end of the day when I looked in on my children sleeping before I went to bed. So I think the best way to describe it was there was a mixture. The day was a mixture of the intensity of doing my job with the surreal.
You're a witness to history.
So, a couple of examples of the intensity of doing my job. Number one, very soon after the attacks, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine took credit for the attacks, public credit. And so the president asked me, "What do you know about this group?" And so I told him, this is a long existing anti-Israel Palestinian group, long history of terrorism against Israel. They don't have the capabilities to do this. They didn't do this. A little while later, they thought better of it and retracted their claim of responsibility. Later that day, he asked to see me alone. So in his office on Air Force One, which is a tiny little place, no bigger than this platform. So it was me, the president, and his chief of staff, Andy Card. And the president said to me, "Michael, who did this?" Which is the kind of the question you get from a president, kind of direct question you get. I told him that I had not seen any intelligence that would take us to a perpetrator. And so what I'd be telling him was my best assessment. And he said, "I understand the caveat, now get on with it." It's the way President Bush was, very direct. I told him that there were two nation states that had the capability to do this, Iran and Iraq, but that neither one of those had anything to gain and both had everything to lose from doing something like this. So I didn't think it was one of them. I told him that I would bet my children's future that when we get to the end of this trail, it will take us to Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. I've never told my kids that. He then asked me, when will we know? Which is another kind of question you get from a president, right? Of which there's
It's unknowable.
Right, it's at that moment unknowable, right? And so I did what a good analyst does, is I provided context. So I went back very quickly in my mind to all the other attacks, terrorist attacks against the United States and how long it took us to know who did it. So I said, East Africa bombings by Al-Qaeda, a couple days. The coal bombing, Al-Qaeda coal bombing in Yemen, several months to figure out that Al-Qaeda did it. The bombing of Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia and the loss of the Marines there, almost a year to figure out who did it. So I walked through those for him and I said, "Mr. President, we may know soon, and then again, it may take some time." So that's a second example of the intensity of doing your job. The third was on the flight home that night from Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha back to Andrews Air Force Base. CIA sent me some intelligence that a foreign intelligence service had given to us, and that intelligence said that what happened today on 9/11 was the first of what will be 2 waves of attacks. So you can imagine, so I presented that to the president, told him who the foreign country was, told him as much as I could tell him about the sourcing of the material, to give him some sense of the credibility. But imagine being the president, and the country has just suffered its worst attack on the homeland in its history. Your number one job is to make sure that doesn't happen, by the way. And now your intelligence briefer is telling you that this may be the first of 2. So all those examples of the intensity of doing my job that day, the surreal. I flew on Air Force One a lot that year that I briefed him. When we came back to Air Force One from the school that we were at, where the president was doing an education event, we came back to Air Force One. It was ringed by Secret Service with automatic weapons. Never saw that before. Everybody's briefcase, backpack was searched, including the White House Chief of Staff's, including my briefcase full of classified information. I didn't say no. I let them go through it. Yeah. When we took off on Air Force One, it wasn't a leisurely takeoff. It was in the back of your seat. I didn't know a commercial jet could do what Air Force One did that day. I was with the president's senior staff in their, they have a senior staff compartment on Air Force One. I was with them when the first tower collapsed. And I remember the president's doctor just saying, "Oh my God." Nobody said a word. Maybe the most surreal moment was on final approach to Andrews that night. The president's military aide, the individual who carries around the nuclear football, was looking out the left side of the aircraft, and lights were dimmed inside Air Force One. And he waved me to come over to the window, and he pointed out the window, and I looked out, and there was a fighter jet on the wingtip of Air Force One. And he said to me that's from the DC Air National Guard. There's another one on the other wing. It was so close you could see the pilot. You could see the pilot's facial features. You could see the pilot looking at us. Then the president's military aide told me what their job was. Because at that point, every commercial flight in the United States had been grounded. So there was no risk of somebody flying a plane into Air Force One at that point. He said, no, their job is if somebody fires a surface-to-air missile at Air Force One on final approach, their job is to get in between that missile and Air Force One. And then as you looked beyond the fighter jet, you could see the still burning Pentagon. So that's another example of the surreal. And that was the first moment that day when sort of the day caught up with me and I had tears on my face.
Yeah. You mentioned that President wanted to know who did this, and you mentioned the nation states that had the capability, but almost certainly not the intent. You mentioned Iran and Iraq. I found it interesting in your book that you wrote that, contrary to what some have asserted, all this time with the president, you never observed any personal or particular animus of George W. Bush toward Iraq and Saddam Hussein on his part. And you said you did not see that.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Others, of course, would make a connection that...
So I believe there were other parts of the administration
yeah.
that looked at this as an opportunity to deal with the Iraq problem once and for all. But I never detected that with the president. In fact, in the run-up to 9/11, the only time that we talked about Iraq is, in fact, a couple of cases. One where it was absolutely clear that the sanctions were starting to erode, and there was a concern about that, of course. Time was marching on, and the sanctions were eroding. And the second time was they had made a significant enhancement to their air defense capabilities, and we told him about it, but those are the only two conversations I ever remember with him about Iraq. And then post 9/11, he asked about Iraq and Iran a couple times, and George Tenet and I, on those couple of occasions, made it absolutely clear that we didn't think either country had anything to do with it.
And on the question of whether Iraq had an operational relationship with al-Qaeda, CIA's analytic line was no.
Correct. Correct, with some caveats that would take a lot of explaining, but yes, CIA's analytic judgment was that there was no operational relationship between the Iraqi intelligence service and al-Qaeda, no Iraqi knowledge of, no Iraqi foreknowledge of, no Iraqi assistance to, none. Now, there were some in the administration that tried to, particularly in the vice president's office, who tried to push that line.
Right.
And to this very day, there are some from the Bush administration who talk about a link between Al-Qaeda and Iraq, but CIA never saw such a link. And I will tell you that it got pretty heated at times between CIA and those in the Bush administration who were pushing that line. And my boss at the time, Jamie Missick, who ran the operational arm of the agency, briefed President Bush one day, and he raised the issue with her. He said, I know that there are people out there who are pushing this. I know what you guys think. Stick to your guns. Stick to your guns. Yeah.
And that's the best advice, I guess, one can give when there is a fear of being politicized, changing the analysis to fit the preconception of the policymaker, which everybody in their better moments realizes is not a good thing. So after 9/11, you continue to brief President Bush about CIA paramilitary activities to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan and to find bin Laden. Why was CIA in country 3 weeks before the U.S. military?
Because we had, there are two reasons. One is we had pre-existing relationships with the Northern Alliance, which were non-Pashtun folks in northern Afghanistan who had been fighting the Taliban for years, and we had a pre-existing relationship with those people that we were able to draw on. Right. Shows you the value of those kind of relationships. Shows you the value of a country's intelligence services maintaining those kind of relationships over time. And then secondarily, we had a plan.
Right.
We had a plan. It was actually called the plan. We had a plan to go after Al-Qaeda and dismantle it. And that plan had been put together in President Clinton's essentially last days in office.
Right.
And so it was on the shelf, ready to go. And so when President Bush said, we're going after these people and make sure this never happens again, we were able to say, here, literally, here's the plan.
And in fact, historically, speaking as a CIA historian, that's how CIA got the covert action mission. The ability to utilize secret relationships to do these foreign policy initiatives. So
I think the other thing to say here is that CIA is a remarkably flexible and agile organization.
yeah,
The U.S. military a little less so. They're an aircraft carrier, and it takes a little bit more time to turn, and we're more of a little frigate, right, that can turn a lot more quickly. Mm-hmm. I remember when Dave Petraeus first came to the agency as the director, we were having a meeting on a particular issue, and he said, I want this done. And the people he was talking to said, yes, sir. And he said to me, he said, I want you to make sure this happens. I said, okay. A week later, he said to me, where's the plan for that thing I asked for? And I said, what do you mean plan? Actually, don't do plans here. We just do it. And he said, do you remember what I'm talking about? And I said, oh, they left the night, they left the night you told them to. They were on the plane that night to that particular country. So we have this speed and this agility that it is actually quite remarkable.
Now you were a PDB briefer, which is an intense, exhausting job, and about a year is enough for anybody.
Yeah.
I've known several PDB briefers, including my wife, and a year is all we could sustain at our house. Your last session with President Bush, January 2002, you know what I'm going to say. You delivered the news that, not welcome news, that bin Laden had escaped from U.S. forces at Tora Bora. Would you describe the president's reaction? So here's the scene, right? The president is at his ranch in Texas. I'm there. My successor is there because I'm introducing my successor, who, by the way, is now the number 3 at the CIA. So I'm introducing my successor to him that day, and he's with me. And it's him and the two of us,
And we're meeting in a trailer where there's a video teleconference, a secure video teleconference, and we're waiting for the vice president to join us, the national security advisor to join us on the screen, and for George Tenet, the CIA director, to join us. And so we walk in the trailer, and the first thing he says to me, he says, "Got anything new today?" And so I said, "Mr. President, I have some really bad news," and I told him that we've learned that bin Laden escaped from Tora Bora. The president, I had never in the entire year briefing him heard the president raise his voice. And he shot the messenger. He shot me. How could you let this happen, Michael? What is your plan now? What is your plan now to get him? I've never seen him as angry as he was that morning. And then the screens light up, right? And on the screens are the smiling, laughing faces of George Tenet, the vice president, and Condi Rice are having a good time wherever they are. And the president says, "What the hell is this that Michael's told me about bin Laden?" And the smiling faces went away. So I never did get to introduce my successor. That's how upset the president was. And my successor is thinking, is it like this every day? So I got in the car and I drove to Dallas, and that was the end of my briefing experience.
Later on, when you were in more senior positions, were you able to counsel PDB briefers on how to deliver unwelcome news?
So you got to, there isn't a way to do it. You have to, it's this. People call it speaking truth to power. It is an incredibly important tenet of the CIA, both on the operational side of the business and on the analytic side of the business. Telling the president what you know and what you think, irregardless of the politics, irregardless of the policy implications. There were plenty of times where we told a president something that strongly suggested that his policy wasn't working. So, there was a group of analysts who had to tell President Bush in 2003 that his policy in Iraq was not working, and that the insurgency had boiled over to a full-blown civil war. It was an incredibly unwelcome message. The only way to do that is to give it straight, right? The only way to do that is to give it straight and not talk about the policy implications, right? Not say your policy is failing, but say, here's what we know, here's what we think, and not being afraid of being shot like I was. Sometimes there's no way to avoid that. Jim Clapper will tell you that when he told President Obama about Edward Snowden and what Edward Snowden had done, that he got shot by President Obama.
Right. And that news about bin Laden leaving Tora Bora, that was our last fix on him until much later when we get the first news that there's this unusual compound in Abbottabad, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
How did 9/11 change CIA as an institution? Because I was watching the second plane on the video go in, and one of my analysts and economists said, nothing will ever be the same. And he turned out to be a prophet. How did the agency change,
and just
transform?
Say one more thing that I think is, remarkable about the place, and then answer your question directly. CIA is the most mission-focused place I have ever seen. Everything is about the mission, whether it's collecting intelligence, doing analysis, or doing conducting covert action. Everything is about the mission. It's CIA's great strength, and by the way, it's also its great weakness, which we can talk about at another time, but it's its great strength. And George Tenet was concerned that as 9/11 was unfolding, as the attacks were actually happening, that CIA headquarters might be a target, and so he evacuated CIA headquarters. And so most people, the vast majority of people who worked there, got sent home. So that night at the gate of CIA, there was a remark of the night of 9/11, right? As I was being dropped off by a driver and picking up my car to go home, there was really a remarkable scene playing out at the gates of CIA with literally hundreds of people who had gone home earlier in the day coming back and saying, I want to help. What can I do? There were retirees who had retired years earlier who came back to the gate that night and said, I want to come back. I want to serve. What can I do to help? That sense of mission is incredibly strong, and I think 9/11 made it even stronger. But I think the biggest change is that 9/11 took CIA back to its OSS roots. Mm-hmm. So the predecessor organization to the Central Intelligence Agency was the Office of Strategic Services, which was the intelligence collection, covert action arm of the United States during World War II. And by back to our roots, I mean back to collecting intelligence in war zones and conducting covert action in war zones to defeat the enemy. And we did that in a very, very significant way with extraordinarily significant resources and a shift of resources internally. I think that was the big change.
Okay. And then we had to deal with Iraq. You've described the call, the analytic call that Iraq had at WMD, weapons of mass destruction, when in fact it turned out that it did not. You described it as one of the biggest intelligence failures in CIA history. Why did we get it so wrong, and what did we learn from that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We could talk about this. We could literally teach a class, an entire course on this.
But briefly, then.
Briefly. There were two failures. First failure, which never gets talked about, is a collection failure. Right. Remember I talked about the missions, right? CIA and NSA failed to penetrate Saddam's inner circle to learn what he was actually doing. Right? What Saddam actually did is he stopped his programs. He had them. He stopped them because he believed that that was necessary for the United States of America to get rid of the sanctions. Mm-hmm. He was confident that the CIA and the United States of America would figure out that he had stopped them and that we would roll back the sanctions. But he didn't want his arch enemy, Iran, to know that.
Or his subordinates, even.
Or his subordinates. So he kept on pretending, right, even with his subordinates, that he had these programs going. So first of all, collection failure, that we didn't penetrate that smallest of inner circles. The second was an analytic failure. The analytic failure was not in getting the call wrong. We made three judgments about his weapons of mass destruction. Number one, that he had chemical weapons. That he actually had physical possession of chemical weapons. Number two, that he had an ability to produce biological weapons. He didn't have them, but he had an ability to produce them. And number three, that he was reconstituting, he was restarting his nuclear weapons program. Not that he had restarted, but that he was in the process of doing that. Those were the three judgments. The analysts saying those three things were not the mistake. Because, why do I say that? Because if I brought into this room all of the information that the analysts had and put it on the table here and asked you to go through it, and you didn't know the truth, you just had to go with what was on the table, you would come to the same conclusions the analysts came to. I guarantee you would come to the same conclusions because that's where the data took you. The mistake the analysts made were not in being rigorous enough in asking themselves what their confidence level was in those three judgments. And if they had really thought that through, and if we, the management of the analytics side of the agency, had really pushed them hard on that, they would have said, you know what, we only have low confidence in those three judgments. Why do you have only low confidence? The vast majority of this information is more than 5 years old, since the UN got kicked out of the country in 1998. A good chunk of this information comes from people who don't like Saddam. So question the motives of the people who gave it to you. A good chunk of this information, if not the vast majority of this information, is circumstantial. It's not direct evidence. So it would have been a very different message to President Bush to say, Mr. President, we think these three things, but what you really need to know is that we only have low confidence in them for the following reasons. That would have been a fundamentally different message. It would have been the right analytic call. And that's the fundamental lesson that the analytic side of the agency learned from Iraq WMD, is now every significant judgment, if not every judgment, carries a confidence level. And so you have to say, here's my judgment, here's why I have that judgment, here's my confidence level, and here's why I have that confidence level. And it is now common, it's a commonly spoken lexicon, it's a commonly discussed issue between analysts and policymakers. We're going to talk about the bin Laden story later. It was extensively discussed. Our confidence level that bin Laden was at Abbottabad was extensively discussed with President Obama.
Right. But before we get there, one important weapon in the war on terrorism was the armed drone, which CIA developed right around the time of 9/11 and then became a primary weapon. How effective were these operations? They were controversial, so can you explain some of the decision-making that went into them?
So the first thing I'll say is I'm not going to talk about what CIA did or what CIA didn't do with regard to drones, but I will talk about what the U.S. government did with regard to drones.
Right.
So I think drones get a bad rap. Those people who oppose drones somehow believe that because you are distant, the person pulling the trigger is distant from the act of war that takes place the moment you pull that trigger, that somehow it's easier, and therefore there's something wrong with that. A drone is no different than a cruise missile attack from an Aegis ship over several hundred miles to a pinpoint target. It's no different than a sniper shooting a mile across the battlefield to kill somebody who's not threatening him directly at the moment. It's no different than a B-2 bomber, dropping offset weapons that go hundreds of miles left or right. They are extraordinarily effective at taking out a target, and they're extraordinarily effective at minimizing collateral damage, which is very, very important in this war against jihadist extremists, and minimize collateral damage so you don't end up creating more terrorists than you take off the battlefield. So I think they're completely misunderstood. And I think there needs to be more discussion about it. Right. President Obama thought exactly the same. He thought that we needed to talk about every strike the U.S. government took, how effective they were when they worked, and if we made a mistake, talk about that too. President Obama felt, and I agreed with him, that this is something that the United States of America is going to have to do for a really long time. Mm-hmm. This fight against extremism is a multi-generational fight. My kids' kids are still going to be fighting this fight. And we're going to be using these tools and others like it for a very long time. And we're going to need domestic support for that. And we're going to need at least international acquiescence to it, if not support. So the more you talk about it, the better off you are in both of those cases.
So let's go up to the summer of 2010, when your deputy director to CIA Director Leon Panetta, and the two of you are told that the Counterterrorism Center has found something interesting in Abbottabad, Pakistan, an unusually constructed compound. Can you describe how that came about and your reactions?
Yeah, so the Counterterrorism Center came to brief the director and I 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. We called it small group, but as Winston knows, there must have been 50 people in the room, so it wasn't exactly small. There were so many people in the room that when the leadership of the Counterterrorism Center had something sensitive to tell the director and me, they would say, could we go small at the end? So there was a day in August of 2010 when the director of the center said to Dr. Panetta, can we go small after the meeting? So when our main meeting with them was over, we went into the director's office, and it was the head of CTC and his head analyst and his head operational person, so 5 of us. And he said, the head of the Counterterrorism Center said, we found Abu Ahmed. And the director and I look at each other like, well, who's Abu Ahmed? We had no context. So they explained to us who Abu Ahmed was. Abu Ahmed was this guy who, before 9/11, we knew worked for bin Laden, and who, after 9/11, we knew worked for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, and who detainees told us might be a courier for bin Laden, and one detainee even told us he might be the kind of person who's actually would actually be living with bin Laden. So we were focused on this guy named Abu Ahmed. By the way, that's not his real name.
Right.
It was his Arabic nickname.
Al-Kuwaiti.
Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. And at that point, we didn't even know his nationality. Didn't know he was Kuwaiti. We just knew him by his Arab nickname. And so we learned all of that, by the way, in 2002. And we followed that lead, just like we followed every lead we had on bin Laden. There's a myth out there that the CIA lost focus on bin Laden, and that we didn't get that focus back until President Obama took Dr. Panetta aside and said, I want you to get bin Laden. No. We never lost focus on him. We followed every lead until that lead died. There were literally hundreds of leads. This lead on Abu Ahmed never died. It just kept on going and going and going and going. Now, it took us years to identify his nationality. It took us additional years to identify where he was. It took us additional time to put eyes on him. It took us additional time to follow him back to this, to surveil him and follow him back to this compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Which, by the way, is an upscale city. The West Point of Pakistan is there in this city. It's fairly well off. And so they said, we found Abu Ahmed. They told us the story of Abu Ahmed. Then they showed us some satellite pictures of the compound. And the compound, to say the least, was quite interesting. Larger than any other compounds in the neighborhood. Sectioned off, so it's difficult to get from one part of the compound to another. 2 gates to get in. You gotta go through, gotta open one gate, go in, close a gate, open another gate, go in. Walls that were 12 to 18 feet high, topped with barbed wire. So very, very interesting place. So I gotta tell you, nobody said anything at that meeting about bin Laden being there.
Right.
Nobody said a word. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I mean, I saw the possibility, as did the Counterterrorism Center, as did the director. A couple weeks later, they came back to us and said, we've learned more about the compound. I can't tell you how we learned all this stuff, but we learned more about the compound. 2 brothers, Abu Ahmed being one and his brother Abrar being the other, bought the place. This is how much they paid for it, and they have no visible means of supporting themselves. They don't seem to have jobs. There's no telephone service. There's no Wi-Fi service. All the other houses in the neighborhood had it. Right. The kids who live in the compound don't go to school. All the other kids in the neighborhood went to school. They don't put their trash out to be picked up like all the other houses in the neighborhood. They burn their trash. And on and on and on and on. There's a balcony on the 3rd floor of the main house, and it has a privacy wall on the balcony. And I remember Director Panetta saying, well, isn't the whole purpose of a balcony so you can see out? So why is there a privacy wall so you can't see out. And the analyst said, exactly. So in late September, we took all of this to John Brennan, who was the president's senior counterterrorism advisor, and briefed him. The next day, we were back briefing Tom Donilon, and who was then the deputy national security advisor, and Jim Jones, the national security advisor. And then 3 days later, we were briefing the president. So everybody got it. Everybody got it. President gave us 2 orders on that first briefing. Number 1, don't tell anybody.
Right.
Don't tell anybody.
Including Congress.
Don't tell anybody. Don't tell the United States military. Don't tell the Secretary of Defense. Don't tell the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Don't tell the Secretary of State. Don't tell anybody. I'm the control officer here for who gets to know this information. This was the most closely guarded secret that I've ever been involved in. Mm-hmm. The second order he gave us, which is a very good order, is, Leon, find out what the hell is going on inside that compound.
Collect more.
Collect more. So we go through the fall, and the truth of the matter is we are only able to collect 2 more pieces of information.
Right.
We were able to learn that Abu Ahmed was still working for Al-Qaeda. I can't tell you how we learned that, but we learned that. You know, one of the things we were worried about was the last connection we had between Abu Ahmed and Al-Qaeda was 9 years old, 8 years old. So one of our concerns was maybe he left Al-Qaeda a long time ago and he's working for a drug dealer. Maybe this is a drug dealer in here, not a terrorist.
Right.
So we learned in the fall of 2010 that he was still working for Al-Qaeda, and then we learned something else very interesting. We learned there was a 3rd family living at the compound. So you have Abu Ahmed and his family, you have Abrar and his family, and we learned there was a 3rd family. And we learned that that 3rd family never left the compound.
Right.
The other 2 families left the compound all the time. And we also learned that the kids associated with the 3rd family matched up perfectly to what we thought were the children of bin Laden and how old they would be and what their genders would be. So with that information, that's it. That's the totality of the information. We made a judgment. The analysts made a judgment, not the director and I. We don't make the judgments. The analysts do. The analysts made a judgment that, and I think I'm using the words exact here, we believe that that Abu Ahmed is harboring Osama bin Laden at the Abbottabad compound. And because of Iraq, they did extensive alternative analysis. What else could be true that's consistent with the data? And talked about their confidence levels in what they were looking at. And so they were extraordinarily rigorous. They did their own alternative analysis, and then the chief of the Counterterrorism Center brought in 4 people who he trusted, that he had the greatest trust in the world for, who didn't know anything about any of this, and he asked them to look at all the data and have them say what they think this is. All of them thought bin Laden was there.
We call this red teaming.
Red teaming. This was a red team.
Yeah.
But there's no direct evidence that bin Laden was there. None. This was a circumstantial case. It was in late December, early January that the president said, after we'd gone through several meetings with him about our judgment and all of the data that supported it, the president said, okay, I want you to start thinking about action options.
Right. There was a fear that he would leave because he'd been
Sure.
there.
Sure. I mean, there was this trade-off, right? There was this trade-off that the director and I were very conscious of, which is it would be great to have more intelligence on what's going on inside that compound, but we don't know when he might leave. We don't know how long he's been there. Maybe he's only been there 6 months, and maybe he moves every 6 months. And maybe we're going to wake up tomorrow, and Abu Ahmed and Abrar and the 3rd family is going to be gone. And we're going to start all over again. So there was this trade-off of trying to collect more intelligence against a bunch of stuff you don't know. The president first asked us to think about finish options, and then after a month or so, he asked us to bring in the United States military. So that's when we first briefed the military. It's when I first briefed Bill McCraven, who would be in command of the operation, Great American Bill. And back to this actually Iraq comes together here in a very interesting way with the bin Laden operation. So when the analysts talk about, at CIA, when the analysts talk about confidence levels, they talk about low, medium, and high. And somehow, and this was not a healthy thing, but somehow those low, medium, and high confidence levels got turned into probabilities.
And it went to the policymakers.
What's the probability that he's there? No, this discussion started with the policymakers.
Oh, okay.
Right? It started. And so we started talking about it in probability terms because they did. And we were all over the map. The lead analyst, Maya in Zero Dark 30, Maya really existed, it wasn't her name. The lead analyst, in Zero Dark 30, she says she's 100% sure. In real life, she said she was 95% sure. The senior most analyst in the Counterterrorism Center was 80%, said he was 80% sure. I said I was 60% sure. The president was listening to all of this and said to the director, he said, Leon, why do people have different probabilities, right? Why are they so different? And I was sitting behind, this was in the sit room, Leon's at the table, I'm behind him, and the director gets this question, and he turns around and he says, Michael? So, thinking quickly, I said, Mr. President, let me assure you it's not because people have different information. Right? Everybody who's giving you their assessment here has the same information. We're not withholding information from anybody. I said, I think what's happening here is that people are washing this information through their own experience. And so the counterterrorism people, even those who had gone through 9/11, since 9/11 knew nothing but success after success after success in taking terrorists off the battlefield and in stopping plots and threats. They had a confidence to them from all of that work. They were washing this data through that filter. I told the president, was washing it through my experience with Iraq WMD. Then I said, Mr. President, you need to know that the case that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction is stronger than this case that bin Laden is at Abbottabad. And you could hear a pin drop in the room. But it was absolutely true. That stack of information I told you about that relates to Iraq WMD was much bigger, much deeper, even more clear than the amount of information we had about Abbottabad. He said, Michael, does that mean you wouldn't do this? And that's a whole different conversation that we won't get into. But this juxtaposition of this confidence levels, right, is really, really important. The president would tell you that at the end of the day, he was 50-50. When he took in all the information, he was 50-50 as to whether bin Laden was there. Before the raid, Dr. Panetta and I were in his office alone. We were about ready to leave his office and walk into the ops center that we built at CIA, because this was a CIA operation, covert action. Just in case we went in there and he wasn't there and we got out without being detected, we were going to tell nobody about this.
Right.
So that's why it was a covert action. It was declassified later that night by the president. But as we left the director's office, he said to me, Michael, what do you think? And I said, sir, I won't be surprised if he's there, and I won't be surprised if he's not. So I was kind of, 50-50 at the end of the day, too.
It's still the best information we had since Tora Bora, and I think that's largely why the president made the decision he did.
So my own personal view is that the president's decision to do something was actually an easy one. And Dr. Panetta, who has this very folksy, common man way about him, I think captured it at one meeting. He said, if the American people knew what we know, and knew that the CIA believes that they know where bin Laden was, and we don't go see if he's there, they're going to go out of their minds.
Yeah.
So I think the decision to do something was easy. I think the hard decision for the president was what to do. The easy thing would have been to drop 30-some 5,000-pound bombs from two B-2s.
Right.
That would have been the easy thing to do. The much harder thing to do was to put the lives of American special forces, American SEALs, at risk on the ground,
Yeah.
to make sure you get them, to get any intelligence that's there, and some other factors at play.
I have so many other questions, but we have to look at an end to this. You are one of the most informed national security experts. What keeps you awake at night these days?
So it's a great question. And I get this question all the time. And I got it all the time when I was deputy director and acting director and would do things like this, right? I would always get the question. And when I was a serving CIA officer, I felt I had to answer it with a national security answer. So I would say, terrorists with nuclear weapons. And boy, that still keeps me awake at night. That's a pretty scary thing, and we should take that seriously because terrorists have shown an interest in acquiring weapons of mass destruction. And so we got to take that seriously. But that's not really what kept me up at night back then or what keeps me up at night today. What keeps me up at night is the failure of our political system, both sides of the aisle, to come together, compromise, and make decisions that advance our economy and our society. And the reason that keeps me up at night is that the most important determinant of a country's national security is the health of its economy and its society. And we're in real trouble on that front.
Yeah. Thank you. The Catholic University of America has a lot of students who are interested in public service. A lot of them are interested in careers in U.S. intelligence. What would you say to them about the kinds of people who make successful careers in intelligence as you did?
So I think, the most important thing is the most important thing and the most important thing that the recruiters look for is passion about your country, passion for the job of defending the nation. I think that is the most important thing, right? I think that the most important, and I was talking with a young lady about this earlier, I think the most important determinant of success at the agency, or quite frankly anywhere, is the ability to self-assess your own performance. So I have this really weird habit, guys, of every night before I go to bed, and I've done this my entire life, I know I'm weird, is I say to myself, how did you do today? How did you do at this? How did you do at this? How did you do at this? Tonight before I go to bed, I'll ask myself, how did you do at Catholic University? And how could you have done better? And I'm really hard on myself. I'm harder on myself than any boss ever was. And then I make adjustments based on that honest self-assessment, or that self-critical self-assessment. And I think that when you do that, you grow extraordinarily rapidly in whatever profession you're doing. We did, I mentioned earlier to this young lady that we did a study once at CIA, on the analytics side at CIA, maybe Winston will remember this. We did a study is there any correlation between what school you went to and your success as an analyst at CIA? Answer, no. No correlation whatsoever. Doesn't matter whether you went to Harvard or the University of Akron. Right? What matters is hard work, pursuit of doing a great job, and being open to learning. Right? Those are the most important pieces of success of doing anything.
That's great. Well, let's give Mr. Morell some feedback for his self-assessment. Great. Thank you. Time for questions?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. We went a little long, but
as long as you want.
Great.
As long as they can take it.
Okay. Mr. Morell graciously will answer some questions. Do we have a mic or two? Or if not, you'll have to speak up. And because of the lights, we actually can't see you.
Right, we really can't see you.
So maybe if you could come up.
So if somebody's doing their accounting out there, we can't see.
Yeah. I see a mic being passed. Okay.
Hello. Based on your vantage point in close proximity to President Bush, could you describe how the administration made the decision to invade and cause regime change in Afghanistan? Were there any other more pinpointed alternatives that were entertained? I mean, if you could just sort of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, be very honest with you, I provided the intelligence and I walked out of the room, right? So I was not there for the policy discussions. I could go into excruciating detail about policy decisions that the Obama administration made because I was in the room. But I will tell you, I think the thinking was that the Taliban had developed such a close relationship with Al-Qaeda that, and by the way, there was a diplomatic effort to get the Taliban to turn over Al-Qaeda. There was an effort made to give the Taliban the opportunity to do the right thing.
It's 5 times.
And they wouldn't do it. And so an assessment was made that not only do we go in and destroy Al-Qaeda, but we go in and destroy this government. Because as long as it exists, it will provide safe haven for Al-Qaeda. I'll tell you that in President Trump's decision to keep our military in Afghanistan, which I strongly support, that was based on a judgment, which I strongly agree with, that if the Taliban came back to power in Afghanistan, that they would give safe haven to Al-Qaeda again, and Al-Qaeda would start plotting again against us, including the homeland. So I think that was the thinking then, and that's the thinking now on the part of President Trump.
Okay. Another question? Let's see.
I think I'm all set. Thank you. So you mentioned that the health of the economy and the health of the general society well-being as the most important indicators of national security. Do you believe that the nation is safe right now? And do you believe what should be done in regard between the correlation between those two to...
So I don't know, right? If I knew that, I'd be running for president. I don't know, right? The truth of the matter is that, and I don't want to go off in a completely different direction here, right? But the truth of the matter is that the modern economy, automation, and globalization has left some Americans behind. Real wages have stagnated for 40 years for a significant number of Americans. The probability of someone born into a lower income group moving out of that into a higher income group has declined sharply in America in the last 25 years. Those people, really starting in 2010, started to speak up politically. And then in 2016, they said, so are you listening to me now? So I think that is the fundamental problem, right? I was at a talk where Warren Buffett was being interviewed a while ago, and I'm a trained economist. Right? I believe in the free market, and Warren said something at that conference that I'll remember for the rest of my life. You know how there's some things that people say and you forget them 10 minutes later? And there's some things somebody says that you'll remember forever? Well, this was one of those moments. Warren said, he said 2 things. Number 1, I believe that capitalism has been the greatest force for good in the history of mankind. I believe that too. I might change that to the Enlightenment, but capitalism is part of that. And then number 2, he said, but I'm afraid we are going to lose it, meaning capitalism. I'm afraid we're going to lose it unless we take care of the people that's left behind. And I think that's why we are in the mess we are in today, and I don't know how to fix it. People are gravitating to the far left for solutions, and they're gravitating to the far right for solutions. And, I tend to think the solutions are in the center, but that's not where people are running to. So I'm really worried.
I've got the mic. The FBI's most wanted poster for Osama bin Laden charges him with complicity in the East Africa embassy bombings, but there's no mention of 9/11. The FBI spokesman, when asked about this, said the FBI doesn't have any evidence linking bin Laden to 9/11. How do you explain that?
I don't have an explanation. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that bin Laden was the main, was the leader of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda did this operation.
How about this explanation? The FBI requested of the CIA that they be allowed to interview Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The FBI refused and said, we'll give his confession to you. I suspect the FBI said, we don't work that way. If we can't talk to him, then we don't have any evidence.
Maybe, I don't know.
Why didn't the CIA let the FBI interview KS?
I don't know. I don't know that it was requested and it was denied. I don't know. I can't help you here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Got one in the back. Maybe two more after this.
Sure.
If there were one or two things you could change about the culture at CIA now, what would they be?
Gosh. So remember when I said that focus on mission was the great strength of the agency. It was also its great weakness. What did I mean by great weakness? What I meant was that if you couldn't draw a direct link between something you wanted to do and mission, nobody would do it. So, training. It's really hard to get CIA officers to go for training because they see it as pulling them away from mission.
Right.
Culture is that strong about doing mission. So we don't do things like leadership training very well. We don't do things like succession planning very well. Every director who's ever shown up has tried, and every director who's ever shown up has failed. And it's the culture. So if I could do one thing, I don't know if I would change it because the upside is so powerful too. So I might tweak that a little bit, but I don't think I'd change it dramatically.
How about more foreign languages?
Well, sure.
Yeah, but that's a
sure.
constant.
Yeah, it's a constant.
Yeah.
It's a tough question. It's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you.
Okay. Sorry. I see one there.
All right. Quick question. You've had this incredible career, and thank you so much for coming to speak with us. Looking back at it, would there be any words of wisdom you have to recent graduates or students who are about to enter the workforce on things you would do differently or things that, like a decision you made that was...
So that is a great question. And it's really ironic that my friend and mentor, Winston Wiley, is here. Because he taught me something extraordinarily important. He taught me that the pursuit of moving up the ladder would not, in and of itself, make a great career. He taught me that moving laterally on the ladder had carried with it the possibility of doing incredible things. And so I remember him actually saying to me, Michael, you're not going to remember the management jobs you had. You're going to remember all the non-management jobs that you had. And you know what? He's right. The jobs that I remember the best and that I am the most fond of were being an executive assistant to George Tenet. We're being the president's briefer. We're doing an overseas assignment with my family. Those are the things that I really remember. I don't remember about what management job I was in when, except being deputy director and acting director. And so if I was going to give you one piece of advice, it would be to take Winston's advice, was don't be so focused on climbing the ladder that you miss the horizontal, right? The horizontal job opportunities, because those can carry great, great meaning and career satisfaction. How about that?
I think we'll end with that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.